What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to Byerly Studios for another awesome time-lapse video. So this is a continuation video of me building out my Grim Reaper 3D Gnome Tumbler. So if you've been keeping up with this project or you saw the other videos, I sculpted the gnome with his soul and scythe and his Grim Reaper cloak on TikTok Live. And then I continued by building a 3D base with resin stalagmites. And then this is the gnome hat tumbler, which will feature a rope around the cloth as well as a skull bead. So let's just jump right in. I'm building out the meat of the hat, or the continuation of the cloak, from the bottom of the tumbler up to the hat. I have a piece of saran wrap between the build that I'm working on and the tumbler below, because that tumbler below is still raw paint. I have not resin or epoxied anything yet, due to the fact that when I paint this, I want to blend it to the bottom. So I've built up a aluminum foil armature, packed that in with some clay, and I went all around it, kind of blocked it in, and now I'm adding some ripples. These are just little strings of clay. And I'm going to blend that down into a downward swooping motion just to create ripples of fabric. And I'll add little striations here and there. I'll take some material away, smooth it with my finger, and then I'll just continuously work this until I get the desired effect. I don't want it to have too many ripples. I want to have, just the overall shape that I want, and then I'll let the paint and the dry brushing do the work. Now, while I'm blending this into the base below, I am trying to think about where the wrinkles from the bottom part of the cloak around the main tumbler are, so that way I can kind of correlate those up to this piece here, so that when they're sitting on top of each other, they look like they're one piece at a distance. A distance being 2 or 3 feet away, Alright, so here we are going to make a skull. Now, I wanted this to be very similar to the skull beads that he has in his beard, as well as the general shape that he has on the handle of his scythe. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of get the general shape that I want, and then once I get that how I like, I'll attach it to the end of his hat there, almost like it's a little bell, but it's not a bell, it's a skull. Now I'll make sure that has contact with the hat as well, so that when it does bake, that there will be a little bit of adherence between the skull bead and the actual fabric itself. I like for my builds to have a lot of voids, sometimes between like fingers and the tumbler, or like for instance the hat here. It has that over swooping motion with a negative void there. I like that, and I believe that it just adds character to the build itself. This is a piece that you add on to make it feel like a diorama piece or a trophy that you would sit on like a geek shelf or just some kind of fun display. I twined 2 pieces of clay together, and then I made a little a rope tassel that goes around his hat there. So let's just go ahead and jump in. So I skipped the Mars Black. I base coated the entire thing in Mars Black, and I also already UV resined the bottom. And now I'm going to come in with some Winsor Violet. I love Winsor & Newton paints, guys. You're going to hear me say it over and over again. It probably is one of my biggest dreams to become sponsored by either them or Folk Art Paint. Or maybe even Sculpey Clay one day, if I become that big of an artist. Help me get there, guys. Woo -woo. So as I bring in more titanium white into that Winsor Violet, I am bringing up those tones, and I am in a way dry brushing with quite a bit of paint on the brush. And I'm just depositing that on the very high spots. I want it to be dark. That's why I'm not coming in with a bunch of browns and bringing the cloak into a brown tone right away. So the depths of those wrinkles are going to be the Mars Black base. There you can see I'm really just adding the purples in, and I'm just bringing in that titanium white a little bit at a time into my mixture until I get the overall highlighted effect that I want. Now you'll see that the saran wrap here is gone, so I am blending that down slowly until it gets to the same tone generally that the main tumbler is. I do like this step though, because the other video that I had posted in this build was the base. Most of the base work was done without the tumbler nearby, so you couldn't really see how it looked until the glamour photos at the very end. But this, you can actually see it sitting on the top of the tumbler itself, and you can kind of see how the colors blend together. It's just a really nice effect to be able to see them together as I paint that. So I'm just going to continue those purple highlights all the way up and around to the bead. So now I'm going to go ahead and bring in some raw sienna. Now I did this on the bottom as well with some other variations of brown, almost to make it look like he's not completely clean. He has a little bit of a little dirt and grime on him. He's out in the field doing his work, collecting souls and taking them to the other side. And now I'm going to come in with some titanium highlights. Now you'll see that I take these titanium highlights also down to the main tumbler itself. So when you're painting something like this, one on top of the other, if you take those highlights down to the tumbler below, and then when you come in with those highlights later, it makes it feel like one piece, because those highlights don't just suddenly stop and begin somewhere else. It makes it feel more uniform. I'm going to give the titanium white base to the bead. And then I give that a few moments to dry, but I am going to use a wet on wet technique to get the blending that I want on the bead. Now I did that wet on wet for the most part with the majority of the beads. I didn't leave a whole lot of texture on the bead itself like I did the other skulls. So there's not a whole lot for the paint just to dry brush over, but it still gives a very nice effect. I want to bring a lot of the darker browns, maybe a burnt umber, to the front of the bead before I brighten it again with a little bit of a lighter brown, maybe a raw sienna and titanium white mixture. And then I'll deepen the voids of his skull. Just continuously working that in, bringing in some of that dark brown. I believe this is a burnt umber. No, yeah, burnt umber. All right, so now I'm coming in and going over the titanium highlights that I had placed previously. They're already completely dry now, and I'm bringing in a color shifting purple from Folk Art. I love these color shifting paints. They're absolutely amazing. They do go on pretty thin though, so sometimes you have to go over it with a thicker hand than you usually would, or do multiple layers. But because I'm going over the titanium white highlights, it brings those tones up, and it makes them brighter than they would be if I were to put them over a black base. So that's why I do add the titanium white highlight beforehand. And I did this on the base as well. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and continue the cloth wrapping around the top of the bead. Now this meant that I didn't have to add any kind of like bronze clasp or anything. It kind of broke up the joint between the bead and the hat in just a nice, easy way. So what I'll do is I'm using Naples yellow here, and then I will come in with some browns and highlight, and then kind of tweak it in a wet and wet technique to get the overall desired effect. So it looks a little bit weathered, but it's really not. The tassel rope is very simple as well. I'm coming in with a raw umber, and then I will do some raw sienna and titanium white highlights for dry brushing where I had left the rope texture with the clay. Very simple on that. There's not a whole lot to it, but it does break up the overall hat, and I just think it makes it feel more like gnomish. Is gnomish a word? It is now. All right, so here it is, completely finished for the most part. Last thing is I'm gonna add the blue. Now this is a color shifting blue from Folk Art. I can't remember the exact name. Please forgive me. But I did add this to all of the beads. Now this blue is also used in the soul that the Grim Reaper is holding, so it continues those colors up through the tumbler. And this is the blue that I used for the base stalagmites as well. So if you haven't seen me do the UV resin stalagmites, go back and check that video out. It's pretty cool, it's very fun, and I look forward to using those techniques in the future. So here's what the tumbler looks like without epoxy, but it is completely hand painted. It looks absolutely fabulous. There's those beads in his beard as they continue up. The colors continue. I mean, you see a seam, but you're never not going to see a seam. I didn't want the clay to be that thin at the seam where it's rippling over the edge of the hat there. So here it is with the UV resin completely set. It really adds that shine, and it kind of brings out those purple colors even more. There it is with the tumbler itself with 2-part epoxy, resin stalagmite base, and as we pan back up here, there's the bead. I'll tell you guys, this thing could not turn out any better than I had expected. I love the dark colors. I love that I was able to bring in some of those color shifting paints like I wanted to use. Even the highlight on his nose is absolutely awesome. The purple really blended well with the Mars black base with some browns, and then that color shifting purple. I do appreciate y'all watching. If you don't follow me already, please subscribe, and also follow me on other social media platforms.